The morning sun cut across the high desert range as Sarah Chun tightened the final scope mount on the M110. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking torque specifications without consulting the manual she had memorized 3 years ago. The rifle rack behind her held 8 more weapons waiting for the qualification course, each one requiring the same meticulous attention. Boots crunched on gravel. Sarah glanced up to see 3 men approaching the firing line, their confident strides marking them as the sniper team from Fort Bragg. The one in front, Sergeant Dalton, had a chest full of ribbons and the easy smile of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. How many of you are watching from states with strong shooting traditions? Texas, Montana, maybe the Carolinas? You know that look a shooter gets when they think they own the range. Dalton had that look. He stopped at the bench where Sarah was working, his eyes moving from her small frame to the rifle in her hands. Torres, his spotter, hung back with arms already crossed. The third man, Martinez, wore the range officer insignia that should have commanded respect, but his expression suggested he shared whatever judgment was forming. $20, she does not make it past equipment check, Torres said to his partner. Dalton smiled, the kind of smile that needed no words. Sarah set the M110 in its rack and reached for the next rifle. Her movements stayed deliberate, unhurried. She had been adjusting weapons on this range for 18 months, and she had learned that responding to doubt only fed it. "You the armorer?" Dalton asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and found it somehow amusing. "Weapon specialist," Sarah replied without looking up. "Your rifles are in the third rack, already zeroed to your specifications from last month." Dalton walked past her to inspect the rack, his fingers running over the scope mounts she had installed at dawn. Torres joined him, both men checking the weapons with the thoroughness of shooters who trusted only themselves. Sarah continued her work, aware of their skeptical glances but unbothered by them. The rifles would speak for themselves. "These specs look off," Torres said, squinting at the data card attached to the first rifle. "The elevation adjustment seems high." "Wind data from yesterday," Sarah explained. 15-mile-per-hour crosswind from the northwest. "I compensated based on the forecast holding through today." Torres exchanged a glance with Dalton. The look said everything. It said that weather reports were not the same as trigger time. It said that book knowledge could not replace experience. It said that a woman who looked like she belonged in an office had no business predicting wind conditions for precision shots. "We will reset them ourselves," Dalton said. His voice was polite, even friendly, but Sarah heard the dismissal underneath. She heard it often enough. Martinez, the range officer, moved closer to examine her work. He picked up the M110 she had just finished, checked the bore, tested the bolt action. His expression remained neutral, professional, but when he set the rifle down, he did not meet her eyes. That told Sarah everything she needed to know about his assessment of her capabilities. The morning continued like that. More shooters arrived, elite marksmen from 3 different units, each one bringing the same assumption wrapped in varying degrees of politeness. Sarah prepared their weapons, answered technical questions with precision, and watched them treat her expertise like something to be verified by men who actually knew what they were doing. By 900 hours, the firing line was full. 12 shooters, all male, all confident, all ready to prove themselves on the 1,000-yard course. Sarah stood behind them with her tools, available if any rifle malfunctioned, invisible otherwise. Dalton took the first lane. His shot broke clean, and the target confirmed a hit at center mass. Torres was already spotting the next target, calling wind. The other shooters watched with professional appreciation. This was what mastery looked like, their expression said. This was what happened when someone actually knew how to shoot. Sarah made a note on her datapad about the wind shift she had detected 3 minutes ago. Nobody asked her opinion. Nobody would. The qualification course ran through lunch, with each shooter rotating through increasingly difficult positions. Sarah remained at the equipment station, her toolkit spread across a portable bench, ready to address any mechanical issues. None arose. The rifle she had prepared performed flawlessly, though no one acknowledged this. Between firing strings, she overheard the conversations. Dalton was explaining his technique to a younger shooter from the 75th Ranger Regiment, his voice carrying across the range with the authority of someone who had made shots in combat that most men only practiced. Torres was calculating wind values with his spotter scope, calling out corrections that the other shooters absorbed like gospel. Sarah checked the barrel temperature on the rifle Martinez had been using. It was running hot, which meant he was firing too quickly, not allowing proper cool down between strings. She made a note, but said nothing. Martinez would figure out himself, or he would not. Either way, he would not appreciate her input. The wind shifted again, this time from the southwest. Sarah felt it on her face before her instruments confirmed it. 3 degrees of change, enough to matter at distance. She watched the next shooter, a Marine Staff Sergeant named Reeves, adjust his scope based on the previous wind call. His shot went wide left. He cursed, then checked his calculations, assuming his math was wrong. It was not his math. It was the wind. Sarah wrote down the correction on her pad, but kept it to herself. "You ever shoot?" A voice asked behind her. Sarah turned to find a younger soldier, maybe 22, with the eager expression of someone still proving himself. His name tape read Collins. He was holding his rifle awkwardly, like he was not quite sure what to do during the break between sessions. "I qualify annually," Sarah said. "Standard requirements." Collins nodded, though his expression suggested this was not the answer he was looking for. He probably wanted to hear about competition shooting, about confirmed kills, about the kind of experience that earned respect on a range like this. Annual qualification was what everyone did. It was baseline, not impressive. Dalton called the range hot again, and Collins hurried back to his lane. Sarah watched him settle into position, watched him overcorrect for wind that had already shifted again, watched his shot go high. He looked frustrated, confused. The conditions were changing faster than the spotters could track them. By 1400 hours, the standard course was complete. Most shooters had qualified, though several had struggled with the variable conditions. Martinez gathered everyone at the main bench, his voice cutting through the afternoon heat. "We are adding an exhibition challenge," he announced. "Extended range target at 2,800 meters. Just for bragging rights. Anyone interested can take a shot after the equipment is cleared." The shooters reacted with immediate interest. 2,800 meters was beyond standard engagement range, the kind of distance where every variable mattered and luck played as much role as skill. It was the kind of shot that made reputations. Sarah began breaking down the firing line equipment, collecting brass, checking rifles for wear. The shooters were already discussing strategy, debating bullet selection and elevation calculations. Dalton was holding court, explaining his approach with the confidence of someone who had made difficult shots before. Torres walked past Sarah, carrying his rifle back to the rack. "You did good work on these," he said, almost grudgingly. "No malfunctions all day." It was the first compliment she had received, and it was about mechanical reliability. Not about her understanding of ballistics, not about her wind calls that could have corrected half the missed shots. About making sure the tools did not break. "Thank you," Sarah said, because there was nothing else to say. The exhibition target was set up at the far end of the range, barely visible even with spotting scopes. Martinez established the rules. 1 shot each, no sighters, cold bore only. Pure skill and calculation. The shooters lined up, each one ready to prove themselves at a distance that most would never attempt in combat. Dalton went first. His preparation was methodical, professional, exactly what Sarah would have expected from someone with his experience. He checked his dope, calculated the trajectory, adjusted for the current wind reading. His shot broke clean. The spotter called it. Missed low and right by 2 feet. Dalton stepped back from his rifle, his expression showing more curiosity than disappointment. "That was a good calculation," he said. "Something is off with the conditions." Torres tried next. His shot also missed, this time high and left. Then Reeves, then Collins, then 4 more shooters. Every single one missed. The target at 2,800 meters was proving impossible under the current conditions. Sarah finished her equipment check and was packing her tools when Martinez called over to her. "Chun, you are qualified as a marksman, correct?" "Expert rating," Sarah replied. 3 years running. Martinez looked at Dalton, then back at Sarah. His expression was neutral, but she could read the thought process. Everyone else had tried. It would look bad not to let her attempt it, even if there was no real expectation she would succeed. Want to take a shot? Martinez asked, in the tone of someone offering something they did not think would be accepted. Sarah looked at the distant target, then at the 12 men watching her with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed amusement. She thought about the wind shifts she had been tracking all day, the temperature gradients she had measured, the barrel performance data she had collected on every rifle. "Sure," Sarah said quietly. "I'll take a shot." Sarah walked to the firing line with her toolkit, aware of the eyes following her movement. The afternoon sun had shifted, changing the light conditions across the range. She set down her equipment and approached the rifle rack, considering which weapon to select. Her hand moved past the M110 she had been maintaining all day, past the custom rifles the competition shooters had brought, and settled on a standard issue M2010. It was the rifle she knew best, the one she had fired hundreds of times during her own qualification courses. Nothing fancy, nothing modified, just reliable performance and known characteristics. Dalton watched her choice with raised eyebrows. "You are not using one of the precision builds?" he asked. "I trust what I know," Sarah replied. She carried the rifle to lane 7 and began her setup. The other shooters had formed a loose semicircle behind the firing line, their postures relaxed. This was entertainment now, a break from the serious competition. Torres had his phone out, probably ready to record what he expected would be a teaching moment about overconfidence. Sarah settled into position behind the rifle, her body automatically finding the correct alignment. She had done this enough times that the mechanics were instinctive. Cheek weld, breathing control, trigger finger placement. The fundamentals never changed, regardless of distance. Through the scope, the target was barely visible, a small dark shape wavering in the heat distortion. 2,800 meters. Most combat engagements happened at a fraction of that distance. This was the realm of record-setting shots and lucky hits, not routine marksmanship. "She is actually going through with it," Collins whispered to someone behind her. His tone carried surprise and something that might have been respect, though Sarah suspected it would evaporate as soon as she missed. Martinez moved to the spotting scope position. "You have one shot," he reminded her, following the same protocol he had used with everyone else. "Call your conditions when ready." Sarah ignored him for the moment. She was reading the mirage through her scope, watching how the heat waves moved across the desert floor. The wind had shifted again in the last 5 minutes, a detail she had noticed while packing her tools. Southwest breeze, maybe 12 miles per hour at ground level, but the upper air currents told a different story. She lifted her head from the scope and looked at the flags positioned at intervals down the range. The near flag showed the southwest wind Martinez had been calling all afternoon. The middle flag was shifting, indicating a transition zone. The far flag, barely visible at distance, was moving differently, north wind at altitude, crossing the bullet path in the final third of its trajectory. Sarah returned to her scope and began her calculations. Bullet drop at 2,800 meters with the M2010 was extreme, requiring significant elevation adjustment. But the wind was the real problem. A 12-mile-per-hour crosswind could push the bullet several feet off target at this range, and that assumed consistent conditions across the entire flight path. She adjusted her scope, the clicks counting up as she dialed in her solution. Behind her, she heard someone chuckle quietly. The sound said everything about what they expected to happen next. "Conditions are variable," Sarah announced, her voice steady. Southwest surface wind at 12 miles per hour, transitioning to north at approximately 1,800 meters, increasing to 15 miles per hour at target distance. Temperature gradient showing hot surface layer with cooler air above. Adjusting for combined drift effect. "That is quite a specific call," Dalton said. His tone was not quite mocking, but it carried the weight of skepticism earned from years of watching people overcomplicate simple shots. Sarah made her final scope adjustment and settled back into position. Her breathing slowed, falling into the rhythm she had learned during countless hours of practice that no one here had witnessed. The rifle felt solid against her shoulder, the trigger familiar under her finger. The target wavered in her scope, dancing in the heat mirage. She waited for her breathing cycle to reach the natural pause, that moment between breaths where the body was stillest. The world narrowed to the small dark shape in her crosshairs and the steady pressure building on the trigger. The shot broke clean. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar force. Sarah stayed in position, watching through her scope as the bullet traced its long arc across the desert. At this distance, there was enough time to doubt the shot, to second-guess every calculation, to wonder if she had missed some critical variable. Martinez was bent over the spotting scope, his body rigid with concentration. The other shooters had gone quiet, the casual atmosphere replaced by genuine curiosity. Even if they expected her to miss, they wanted to see how close she came. A near miss would at least be respectable. The seconds stretched out. Sarah remained motionless behind her rifle, her eyes still pressed to the scope despite the target being too far away to see impact clearly. She had learned long ago that maintaining position was part of the discipline, regardless of outcome. Torres stepped closer to Martinez, trying to see through the spotting scope himself. Collins had his phone raised, recording the moment. Dalton stood with arms crossed, his expression neutral, but his attention completely focused on the distant target. Martinez lifted his head from the spotting scope slowly. His expression had changed, the professional neutrality replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe, or surprise. He looked at Sarah, then back through the scope, as if confirming what he had seen. The silence on the firing line stretched longer. Sarah finally lifted her head from her scope, waiting for the call. Her heart rate had already returned to normal, her breathing steady. Whatever happened next, she had executed her shot according to her calculations. The rest was just physics and luck. Martinez stood up from the spotting scope, his movements deliberate. He looked at Dalton, then at Torres, then back at Sarah. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the quiet range with unusual weight. "Impact," he said. "Center mass." Torres was the first to move. He stepped to the spotting scope and bent down, his movements quick with disbelief. Through the magnified lens, the target sat 2,800 meters downrange, with a clean hole punched through its center. He checked the scope settings, verified the range markers, then looked again. "That is impossible," he said, though the evidence sat undeniable in his field of view. Dalton moved next, his casual confidence replaced by sharp focus. He took Torres's place at the spotting scope and spent 30 seconds examining the target. His jaw tightened. When he stood up, he looked at Sarah with an expression she had never seen from him before. It was not quite respect, not yet, but the skepticism had cracked. Sarah remained at her rifle, her hands steady as she engaged the safety. She had made the shot. The physics had worked exactly as calculated. There was nothing surprising about it, except that these men had never considered she might know what she was doing. Collins lowered his phone, the recording forgotten. "How did you call that wind transition?" he asked. Nobody else picked up on the upper-level shift. "The flags," Sarah replied simply. "And the mirage pattern changes at around 1,800 meters. You can see it if you watch long enough." Martinez was still standing by the spotting scope, his professional mask firmly back in place. "Good shot, Chun," he said, his tone carefully neutral. That was excellent calculation and execution. It was the most mechanical compliment possible, the kind of acknowledgement given to equipment that performed to specification. Sarah accepted it with a nod and began breaking down her rifle. The shot was done, the moment passing, and she had work to finish before the range closed for the day. But the other shooters were not ready to move on. Reeves approached the spotting scope for his own verification, then let out a low whistle. "I had the same rifle system," he said. "Same ammunition. I missed by 2 feet. Different wind call," Sarah said without looking up from her rifle maintenance. "Your shot was 15 minutes ago. Conditions changed." Dalton walked to where Sarah was working, his shadow falling across her equipment. "You have been tracking conditions all day," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes. And you saw us missing the adjustments." "I saw the wind shifting." Whether you adjusted was your call. The statement hung in the air, polite but pointed. Sarah had watched 12 experienced shooters make calculations based on outdated information, and she had said nothing because no one had asked. She had been the invisible technician, present but not consulted, competent but not considered. Torres joined Dalton, his arms no longer crossed. That was a hell of a shot, he admitted. His voice carried a grudging quality, like the words cost him something to say. Most of us could not make that hit with 3 tries. Sarah finished her rifle check and stood, her equipment gathered and organized. I got lucky with the conditions, she said, deflecting the praise with practiced ease. The wind was consistent during my shot window. That was not luck, Collins interjected. You called every variable. That was skill. The word hung between them. Skill. The thing they had assumed she lacked based on her size, her quiet demeanor, her role as support staff rather than shooter. Sarah had spent 18 months on this range, maintaining weapons and watching these same men treat her expertise as theoretical knowledge that meant nothing without trigger time. Now, they were looking at her differently. Not with full respect, not yet, but with the uncertainty of people who had miscalculated something important. Martinez called the range cold and began the official shutdown procedures. The exhibition was over, the day's shooting complete. Shooters began packing their equipment, but the energy had shifted. The casual conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Several of the men kept glancing at Sarah, then at the distant target, as if reconciling what they had witnessed. Dalton lingered as the others dispersed. Your qualification scores, he said. What are they? Expert rating, Sarah repeated. Top 10% of my class. Combat experience? 2 deployments. Afghanistan. Mostly Overwatch and asset protection. The information landed differently now. Before the shot, her credentials had been abstract, disconnected from real capability. After the shot, the same facts carried weight. Nothing about Sarah had changed except their perception. Why do you work as an armorer? Dalton asked. With that skill level, you could be on a team. Sarah shouldered her equipment bag. I like working with the weapons, she said, understanding how they function, keeping them reliable. Someone has to do it well. It was the truth, but not the complete truth. The complete truth was that she had tried to join shooting teams and been dismissed. She had qualified at the top of her training cycles and been assigned to support roles. She had demonstrated competence repeatedly and been told that women did not have the physical capability for precision shooting at distance. So she had taken the armorer position and learned everything there was to know about the weapons themselves. She had studied ballistics, environmental effects, barrel harmonics, ammunition performance. She had become the technical expert everyone relied on without ever asking her opinion on anything beyond mechanical function. Dalton seemed to read something in her brief answer. He nodded slowly. Well, he said, that was an impressive shot. Record-setting distance under difficult conditions. Thank you, Sarah replied. She walked off the firing line toward the equipment shed, her bag heavy with tools and her mind already moving to the next day's maintenance schedule. Behind her, she heard Torres and Dalton talking in low voices, their conversation animated. She caught fragments about wind calls and calculation methods, and how they had missed what she had seen. The words floated across the evening air, validation arriving 18 months late. Sarah kept walking. The shot had proven her capability, but she knew how these things worked. Tomorrow there would be new doubts, new assumptions, new reasons why one good shot did not change fundamental beliefs about who belonged on the firing line. But for tonight, she had made an impossible shot while 12 experts watched. She had called the variables they missed and executed the solution they could not. The target downrange had a hole in it that could not be explained away or dismissed. The equipment shed was quiet in the fading light. Sarah methodically cleaned and stored each rifle, her movements efficient from hundreds of repetitions. The day's heat still radiated from the metal roof, but the concrete floor stayed cool beneath her boots. She worked alone, the way she preferred. Footsteps approached from outside. Martinez appeared in the doorway, his range officer bearing slightly less formal than usual. He watched her work for a moment before speaking. Colonel Briggs wants to see you tomorrow morning, he said. 0800 at battalion headquarters. About what? Your shot. Word travels fast on a base. 2,800-meter hit under variable conditions. That gets attention. Sarah set down the cleaning rod she was holding. Attention was not always beneficial. Sometimes it meant opportunities. More often it meant scrutiny, questions about how someone in her position had developed skills beyond her assigned role. Am I being reassigned? She asked. Martinez shrugged. Above my pay grade. But Briggs was asking about your qualification history, your deployment record. He seemed interested. After Martinez left, Sarah finished her work more slowly than usual. The shed's familiar routine, the precise organization of tools and weapons, felt suddenly fragile. She had built a good position here, respected for her technical knowledge, even if dismissed as a shooter. Change could improve things or destroy them. The next morning, she stood outside Colonel Briggs's office at exactly 0800. His aide, a lieutenant with perfectly pressed uniform, ushered her inside. Briggs sat behind a desk covered with range reports and training schedules. He was older, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in the field. Specialist Chun, he said without preamble. I heard about your shot yesterday. 2,800 meters, first round hit. Yes, sir. Briggs pulled up a file on his computer screen. Your qualification scores are consistently expert level. Top marks in every evaluation. 2 combat deployments with multiple confirmed defensive engagements. So why are you maintaining rifles instead of shooting them? The question was direct, almost confrontational. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I was assigned to armorer duties based on training availability, sir. I performed the role I was given. That is a diplomatic answer, Briggs said. Let me be less diplomatic. You are one of the highest qualified shooters on this base, and we have you doing maintenance work that any competent technician could handle. That seems like a waste of capability. Sarah said nothing. There was no good answer that would not sound like complaint or accusation. The reasons for her assignment were complicated, rooted in assumptions about physical capability and traditional roles that no one stated explicitly, but everyone understood. Briggs leaned back in his chair. We are putting together a precision marksman course, he continued. Advanced training for designated marksmen across multiple units. 6-week intensive covering extended range shooting, environmental analysis, advanced ballistics. I want instructors who can actually perform what they teach. You want me to teach? Sarah asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. I want you to be part of the cadre, yes. You clearly understand the technical aspects better than most, and yesterday you proved you can execute under pressure. The question is whether you want the position. It was the opportunity Sarah had stopped hoping for 3 years ago. A chance to be recognized not just as support staff, but as someone with skills worth passing on. Yet she found herself hesitating. What about the range? She asked. The armor position? We will find someone else. Good technicians are valuable, but great instructors are rare. You are clearly being underutilized in your current role. Sarah considered the implications. Teaching meant visibility, meant proving herself repeatedly to students who would arrive with the same assumptions Dalton and Torres had carried. It meant facing skepticism not once, but continuously in every class, with every new group of shooters who thought they already knew everything. But it also meant finally using the skills she had developed, the knowledge she had accumulated through years of study and practice that no one had ever asked her to demonstrate. I would like the position, sir, Sarah said. Good. Briggs pulled up a schedule on his screen. Course starts in 3 weeks. You will work with 2 other instructors, both experienced snipers. Staff Sergeant Dalton from Fort Bragg and Gunnery Sergeant Williams from 2nd Marine Division. You know Dalton? We have met, Sarah said carefully. Briggs smiled slightly. I heard. He was quite complimentary about your shot in his report. Said it was the most technically sophisticated wind call he had seen outside of competition shooting. The statement surprised Sarah more than the job offer. Dalton had gone from skeptical observer to advocate in the span of 24 hours, based solely on one shot. It suggested either a remarkable openness to changing his mind or a professional integrity that valued capability over preconception. The course will be demanding, Briggs continued. We are pulling shooters from across the division, including some who have significant field experience. They will not automatically respect your instruction. You will need to prove yourself. I understand, sir, but you have already proven yourself to me and to Martinez, and apparently to Dalton. So I am confident you can handle it. Dismissed. Sarah left the office with her career trajectory fundamentally altered. The aide in the outer office gave her a curious look as she passed, probably wondering what a specialist had been doing in a private meeting with the battalion commander. Outside, the morning sun was already heating the desert air. Sarah walked back toward the range, her mind processing the implications of a new assignment. 3 weeks to transition out of her current role, to prepare for teaching responsibilities that would put her in front of skeptical students with something to prove. She thought about Dalton, about how his expression had changed when he looked through that spotting scope, about Torres admitting the shot was skill, not luck, about Collins asking how she had read the conditions when no one else could. One shot had opened a door that years of qualification scores had not. It was frustrating and validating in equal measure. Frustrating that demonstration had been necessary when her record should have spoken for itself. Validating that when given the chance to prove her capability, she had executed flawlessly. Sarah reached the equipment shed and found a note taped to the door. It was from Martinez, written in his precise handwriting. Chun, you did good yesterday. About time someone noticed. The range will miss you. She pulled down the note and folded it carefully. The shed, the rifles, the quiet routine of maintenance work had been her refuge for 18 months. A place where her competence was undisputed, where the weapons responded to her care without judgment or assumption. Now she was leaving it behind for the uncertainty of teaching, for rooms full of students who would arrive doubting and leave either convinced or resentful. It was the harder path, the more visible path, the path she had tried to walk years ago before being redirected to technical work. But this time she had something she had not had before. She had made an impossible shot while experts watched. She had proven that her technical knowledge translated into practical skill at the highest level. Whatever doubts came next, she had evidence that could not be dismissed. 3 weeks passed in focused preparation. Sarah spent her mornings transferring armorer duties to her replacement, a methodical corporal named Hayes who asked detailed questions and took meticulous notes. Her afternoons were dedicated to developing curriculum materials, reviewing advanced ballistics texts, and refining her teaching approach. The Precision Marksman course would cover extended range fundamentals, environmental reading, advanced wind calling, and complex shot execution. Sarah knew the material cold, but teaching required a different skill set than performing. She rehearsed explanations, simplified complex concepts, anticipated questions from students who would test her knowledge. On the Friday before the course began, she met with her co-instructors. Staff Sergeant Dalton arrived first, carrying a folder thick with course materials. He greeted Sarah with a nod that contained none of the previous skepticism. Chun, he said simply, ready for Monday? As ready as I can be. Gunnery Sergeant Williams arrived moments later, a stocky Marine with 20 years of experience and the quiet confidence that came from proven capability. He shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip and direct eye contact. Heard about your shot, he said. 2,800 meters under variable winds. That is solid work. Thank you, Gunny. The 3 instructors spent 2 hours reviewing the curriculum, dividing teaching responsibilities, and establishing standards for student performance. Williams would handle the foundational marksmanship elements. Dalton would cover tactical applications and field scenarios. Sarah would teach environmental analysis and advanced ballistics calculations. When they reached the section on wind reading, Dalton looked at Sarah. You should take the lead on this entire module, he said. Your technical understanding is better than mine. It was a simple statement, professionally delivered, but it represented a significant concession. Dalton was letting her claim expertise in an area where he had substantial experience. Williams nodded agreement without hesitation. That works, the Marine said. Environmental reading wins or loses shots at distance. Students need to learn it right. The meeting concluded with a schedule finalized and responsibilities clear. As they gathered their materials, Dalton paused. Shin, can I ask you something? Sarah looked up from her folder. Sure. That shot you made. You called the wind transition at 1,800 meters. How long have you been tracking conditions at that level of detail? Since my first deployment, Sarah replied. I had overwatch duty, which meant long hours observing. I started noticing patterns in how wind moved across terrain, how temperature gradients affected trajectory. It became a habit. Most shooters never develop that habit, Dalton said. They rely on instruments and calculations, but miss the observational component. You should emphasize that in your instruction. I plan to. Williams interjected. The students will push back, he said matter-of-factly. Some of them have combat experience and strong opinions about methods. You will face resistance. I know, Sarah said. Just stick to the fundamentals and demonstrate what you teach, Williams continued. Respect is earned through consistent performance, not through rank or credentials. You have already proven your capability. Now you just need to prove it repeatedly until they accept it. The advice was practical, delivered without condescension. Williams was treating her as an equal instructor facing common challenges, not as someone who needed special consideration because of her gender. It was the professional approach Sarah had been seeking for years. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. 18 students assembled in the classroom, a mix of Army and Marine Corps personnel, selected for their existing marksmanship skills and potential for advanced development. They ranged from junior enlisted to staff sergeants, all male, all carrying the confidence of soldiers who had already proven themselves competent. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom with Dalton and Williams as Colonel Briggs delivered opening remarks. The students listened with professional attention, their expressions showing interest in the curriculum but neutrality toward the instructors. They had not yet formed opinions. When Briggs finished and departed, Williams stepped forward to begin instruction. Sarah and Dalton took seats at the side of the room, observing as the Marine established foundational concepts. The students engaged actively, asking questions and taking notes. The first hour passed smoothly. During the break, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation. The students were assessing their instructors, comparing credentials, discussing expectations. One voice carried clearly, a corporal named Jennings with an infantry background. Williams is solid, Jennings said. Dalton has the Fort Bragg reputation. But what is the specialist doing here? She qualified expert, sure, but so did half the people in this room. His companion, a sergeant named Park, responded in a lower voice. Heard she made some impressive shot on the range. 20-something hundred meters. Anyone can get lucky once, Jennings replied. Teaching requires consistent performance under pressure. We will see if she can handle it. Sarah kept her expression neutral. The conversation was not hostile, just skeptical, the natural response of experienced soldiers questioning the credentials of an instructor who did not fit their expectations. She had anticipated this. Williams had warned her about it. The only answer was performance. When instruction resumed, Dalton covered tactical shooting scenarios, using examples from actual combat situations. His experience showed in the specificity of his explanations, the practical wisdom embedded in his teaching. The students responded with obvious respect, their questions increasingly sophisticated. Then it was Sarah's turn. She walked to the front of the classroom, connected her laptop to the projector, and brought up the first slide. Environmental factors in precision shooting. She had rehearsed this presentation dozens of times, refined every explanation, prepared for every likely question. Environmental conditions determine shot success at extended range, she began. Temperature, humidity, altitude, and especially wind create variables that exceed the margin of error at distances beyond 1,000 meters. Understanding these factors is not optional for precision shooting. It is fundamental. She clicked to the next slide, showing wind patterns across varied terrain. The students were watching with polite attention, but not engagement. She was delivering information, not yet earning credibility. Standard practice is to measure wind at the shooting position and apply that value across the entire bullet path, Sarah continued. This works at closer ranges where conditions are relatively consistent. At extended ranges, it fails. Wind changes across distance, often dramatically. Measuring only at your position means missing the conditions that will actually affect your bullet. Jennings raised his hand. With respect, instructor, most shooting happens at ranges where that level of detail does not matter. Are we overcomplicating this? It was a reasonable question, professionally delivered, but it carried an undertone of challenge. Sarah recognized it as the first test, the moment where students began probing for weaknesses in instructor knowledge. Fair question, Sarah replied. At standard engagement ranges, you are correct. Simple wind measurement is sufficient. This course focuses on extended range shooting, where those complications become critical. The difference between a hit and a miss at 2,500 meters could be a 2-mile-per-hour wind shift you did not detect. She clicked to the next slide, showing actual data from the shot she had made 3 weeks ago. The wind values at different range intervals, the transition point where surface wind gave way to upper air currents, the calculation that accounted for multiple wind speeds across the bullet path. This is data from a real shot at 2,800 meters, Sarah said. Surface wind was 12 miles per hour southwest. At 1,800 meters, it transitioned to 15 miles per hour north. If I had used only the surface measurement, my bullet would have missed by 3 feet. Instead, I called the transition and adjusted my hold accordingly. The result was a center mass hit on the first shot under conditions where 12 other qualified shooters had already missed. The classroom went quiet. Several students leaned forward, studying the data on the screen. Jennings was looking at the numbers with new attention, his skeptical expression replaced by curiosity. How did you detect the transition point? Park asked. Multiple indicators, Sarah replied. Flag movement at different distances, mirage patterns changing around 1,800 meters, terrain features that create turbulence zones. I will teach you to read all of these signs over the next 6 weeks. By the end of this course, you will see wind the way I do. The first week of instruction established patterns. Williams covered fundamentals with patient precision. Dalton brought tactical scenarios to life with combat experience. Sarah taught environmental analysis with technical depth that initially impressed the students, then challenged them as the complexity increased. By day 5, the classroom dynamics had shifted. The students who arrived skeptical were now engaged, asking sophisticated questions about wind reading and ballistic calculations. Jennings, the vocal doubter from the first day, had become one of the most active participants in Sarah's sessions. But classroom knowledge was theoretical. The real test came during range time. Thursday morning, the entire class moved to the firing line for their first extended range practical exercise. The target was set at 1,500 meters, a challenging distance, but within the capability range of qualified marksmen. Each student would take 3 shots, applying the environmental reading techniques Sarah had taught. Williams supervised the first group. Dalton managed safety protocols. Sarah moved between shooting positions, observing technique and offering corrections. The morning was cooperative, students executing well-practiced fundamentals with decent results. Most hits were within acceptable margins. Then Park stepped up for his string. He was a careful shooter, methodical in his preparation. Sarah watched him go through his checklist, measuring wind, calculating adjustments, settling into position. His first shot went high and left, missing by 18 inches. Park looked frustrated. He rechecked his calculations, adjusted his scope, and fired again. This shot missed low and right by similar distance. He was chasing the error, overcorrecting without understanding the root cause. Sarah approached his position. Hold your adjustments, she said quietly. Check your wind call again. I have 12 miles per hour from the west, Park replied, showing her his notes. Same as the station reading. Look at the mirage between 8 and 1,200 meters, Sarah instructed. What do you see? Park studied the heat waves through a scope. It shifts, he admitted, moves differently than the near field. That is a wind transition zone. Your bullet is passing through 3 different wind speeds. You calculated for only one. She guided him through the corrected analysis, showing him how to identify the transition points and weight the wind values across the entire path. Park made the adjustments and fired his third shot. It struck 6 inches from center, a significant improvement. Good correction, Sarah said. You just learned more from that miss than you would have from an easy hit. The morning continued with similar interactions. Sarah identified errors the students could not see themselves, corrected technique problems that other instructors might have missed, demonstrated environmental reading at a level that exceeded what most of them had considered possible. During lunch break, she overheard Jennings talking with two other students. "She knows her stuff," he was saying. "That wind call correction she gave Park was something I never would have caught. The technical depth is legitimate." It was validation, the kind Sarah had been working toward since the course began. The students were accepting her expertise based on demonstrated knowledge and effective teaching. The initial skepticism was fading. But that afternoon, everything changed. Colonel Briggs appeared at the range with a visitor, a full bird colonel from division headquarters named Watts. They observed from the tower for 30 minutes, watching instruction and student performance. Then Briggs called the instructors up for a conference. "Watts wants to see a demonstration," Briggs explained. "He is considering expanding this program to other units and wants to evaluate instructor capability. I need one of you to take a shot at 2,500 meters. Cold bore, current conditions, in front of the entire class." It was a performance requirement, the kind of test that separated instructors who taught theory from those who could execute under pressure. Sarah glanced at Dalton and Williams. Both men were certainly capable of making the shot. Williams spoke first. "I will take it," he said. 2,500 is within my effective range." "Actually," Briggs said, looking directly at Sarah, "I want Specialist Shun to take this shot. She is the one teaching advanced environmental reading. Let's see her demonstrate it." The request hung in the air. Sarah felt the weight of multiple assessments converging into this single moment. The students watching, the visiting colonel evaluating, her co-instructors observing. One shot to validate everything she had taught, everything she claimed to know. "Understood, sir," Sarah said. They moved to the prepared firing position. The target at 2,500 meters was barely visible, a small shape wavering in afternoon heat. The entire class gathered behind the firing line, their conversations falling silent as Sarah collected a rifle and ammunition. She could feel their attention, the focus of 18 students who had spent a week learning her methods and now wanted to see if she could perform them. Jennings stood with arms crossed, his expression neutral, but his posture suggesting judgment being withheld pending results. Sarah settled into position and began her environmental analysis. The afternoon wind was complex, thermal currents rising from sun-heated ground and creating turbulence at mid-range distances. She studied the mirage carefully, watching how the waves moved and shifted across the vertical plane. Through her scope, she tracked the wind flags positioned at intervals downrange. Near flag showing 8 miles per hour from the southwest. Middle flag indicating transition to 10 miles per hour from the west. Far flag suggesting 12 miles per hour with a slight northerly component. 3 distinct wind zones, each requiring different compensation. She calculated the weighted average, factored in the temperature gradient, adjusted for the bullet's decreasing velocity as it traveled downrange. The math was complex but familiar, the kind of analysis she had performed hundreds of times in practice. Behind her, she heard whispered conversation. Someone asking if she would actually make the shot. Someone else saying they had seen her data but never watched her shoot. The doubt was present but tempered, uncertainty rather than dismissal. Sarah made her final scope adjustments and controlled her breathing. The rifle felt solid, the fundamentals automatic. She found her natural pause between breaths and began the trigger press. The shot broke clean. The rifle recoiled. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet trace its arc across the desert afternoon, climbing and falling through the 3 wind zones she had called, carrying the calculations that would determine whether a week of teaching had been backed by genuine capability. Colonel Watts stood at the spotting scope, his expression unreadable. The students waited, their attention fixed on the distant target. Dalton and Williams watched with professional interest, their own reputations indirectly tied to whether their co-instructor could perform. Watts lifted his head from the spotting scope slowly. He looked at Briggs, then at Sarah, then back at the target. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent range. "Hit," he announced. 4 inches high, 2 inches right. That is exceptional shooting. The students reacted with immediate respect. Park let out an appreciative whistle. Jennings uncrossed his arms and nodded with genuine approval. The others exchanged glances that said they had just witnessed something significant. Sarah engaged her safety and stood, her heart rate already returning to normal. The shot had been good, not perfect, but well within the standard for the distance and conditions. More importantly, it had demonstrated that she could perform under scrutiny what she taught in the classroom. "Outstanding work," Chun Briggs said. "Colonel Watts, I believe you have seen what you needed to see." "Indeed," Watts replied. "The technical knowledge is clearly paired with practical skill. I am convinced this program deserves expansion." He departed with Briggs, leaving the instructors and students on the firing line. Williams clapped Sarah on the shoulder, a brief gesture of professional acknowledgement. Dalton gave her a slight smile that suggested he had never doubted the outcome. The students gathered their equipment, their conversations now including Sarah's name with the same respect they used for the other instructors. The demonstration had accomplished what a week of classroom teaching could not quite achieve alone. She had proven herself under pressure, in front of witnesses, with stakes that mattered. The second week pushed students harder. Classroom sessions covered advanced topics like spin drift compensation, Coriolis effect at extreme distances, and atmospheric density calculations. Range time increased in difficulty, with targets placed at progressively longer distances under increasingly challenging conditions. Sarah found her teaching rhythm. She explained complex physics in accessible terms, demonstrated techniques with patience, and corrected errors without condescension. The students responded with effort and engagement, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest in mastering the material. Wednesday afternoon brought a field exercise. The class moved to rough terrain 2 miles from the main range, where targets were positioned at various distances across uneven ground. Students would work in pairs, one shooting while the other spotted, then switch roles. The exercise tested their ability to apply classroom knowledge under field conditions. Sarah paired with Park for the first rotation, observing his shooting while Dalton and Williams supervised other pairs. Park was improving rapidly, his wind calls more accurate and his shot execution more confident. He successfully engaged targets at 1,200 and 1,600 meters, then prepared for the longest target at 1,900 meters. The target sat on a ridge, partially obscured by heat mirage and complicated by wind flowing over the terrain feature. Park spent 5 minutes analyzing conditions, measuring wind at his position, studying the mirage pattern, calculating his solution. "I have got it," he said finally, showing Sarah his calculations. 14-mile-per-hour wind from the northwest, adjusted for the ridge effect, adding 3 miles per hour to the effective speed. Sarah studied the terrain carefully. "Check the vegetation on the backside of that ridge," she said. "What do you see?" Park looked through his spotting scope. "The brush is moving differently," he observed. "More agitated than the near side. That is accelerated wind coming over the crest," Sarah explained. "The ridge is creating a compression zone. Your bullet will pass through normal wind until about 1,700 meters, then hit accelerated flow for the final 200 meters. You need to account for both." Park recalculated, adjusting his hold to compensate for the dual wind zones. His shot struck 8 inches from center, a solid hit given the complex conditions. He looked pleased with himself, and Sarah felt the satisfaction of watching a student master difficult material. The exercise continued through the afternoon. Students struggled with some shots, succeeded with others, learned from both outcomes. Sarah moved between positions, offering guidance and corrections, watching capabilities develop in real time. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, Dalton called the class together for an announcement. "Tomorrow we are doing something different," he said. "Night shooting exercise. You will engage targets under low light conditions using your environmental reading skills without visual references. This is as close to combat conditions as we can simulate in training." The students reacted with mixed excitement and apprehension. Night shooting was challenging, requiring different techniques and greater reliance on instruments and calculation rather than observation. It was the kind of training that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. That evening, Sarah prepared lesson materials for the night exercise. She reviewed low-light ballistics, thermal layering effects after sunset, and techniques for reading wind without visual mirage references. The material was complex, and she wanted her explanations clear and practical. A knock on her office door interrupted her work. Jennings stood in the hallway, holding a notebook filled with detailed notes. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" he said. "Of course. Come in." Jennings sat down and opened his notebook. "I have been thinking about the ridge wind compression you showed Park today," he began. "How do you identify those zones before you shoot? What are the visual indicators?" Sarah spent 30 minutes walking him through terrain analysis, explaining how vegetation movement, geological features, and thermal patterns all provided clues about wind behavior. Jennings took meticulous notes, asked intelligent follow-up questions, demonstrated genuine interest in mastering the material. "This is way more complex than anything I learned in basic sniper school," he admitted. "I thought I understood wind reading, but you are operating at a completely different level." "It is just observation and pattern recognition," Sarah said. "You develop it over time by paying attention to environmental details most shooters ignore." "How long did it take you to get this good?" "Years," Sarah replied honestly. "I started really focusing on it during my first deployment. Lots of hours on Overwatch, lots of time to observe and learn. Nobody taught me this level of detail. I figured it out by studying what worked and what did not." Jennings nodded slowly. "That makes sense. You're teaching us in 6 weeks what took you years to develop through trial and error. That is valuable." After he left, Sarah returned to her preparation, but found herself reflecting on the conversation. Jennings had arrived at the course skeptical, questioning why a specialist was teaching experienced shooters. Now he was seeking her out after hours for additional instruction, treating her expertise as legitimate and valuable. The shift in perception was complete. She had earned respect not through credentials or rank, but through demonstrated knowledge and teaching effectiveness. The students no longer saw her gender or her position. They saw an instructor who could help them become better shooters. Thursday night brought clear skies and dropping temperatures. The class assembled at the range after sunset, their equipment ready for low-light operations. Thermal scopes and night vision devices were distributed, along with ammunition specifically selected for consistent performance in cold conditions. Williams briefed the safety protocols while Dalton explained the exercise structure. Then Sarah took over, walking the students through the unique challenges of night shooting. Temperature inversion layers, thermal currents reversing after sunset, wind patterns changing as the ground cooled. The environmental factors they had learned to read during daylight all behaved differently at night. "Your instincts will be wrong," Sarah warned. "Conditions you think you understand will surprise you. Trust your instruments, verify with multiple data sources, and be prepared to adjust your assumptions. Night shooting reveals weaknesses in technique that daylight compensates for." The first student moved to the firing position, a sergeant named Rodriguez with extensive combat experience. He was confident, methodical, and accustomed to shooting under difficult conditions. His target was 1,400 meters downrange, visible only as a thermal signature against the cooler background. Rodriguez went through his analysis, measuring temperature, checking wind instruments, calculating his solution. He took a shot with steady execution. The round missed by 2 feet, sailing high and right of the target. He looked genuinely surprised. "I had that calculated correctly," he said, frustration evident in his voice. Sarah moved to his position. "Your math was good," she said, "but you used the surface temperature reading. Check the thermal layer data at 10 feet above ground. What does it show?" Rodriguez checked his instruments. "It is 6 degrees warmer," he reported. "That is an inversion layer," Sarah explained. "Your bullet is passing through air that is warmer than the surface layer, which affects density and therefore trajectory. You need to adjust for the actual air temperature your bullet travels through, not the temperature at ground level." Rodriguez recalculated using the layered temperature data and took his second shot. This one struck 12 inches from center, a significant improvement. He stared at the target confirmation with something close to revelation. I never even considered that, he admitted. In the field, I would have kept missing and never known why. That is why we train, Sarah said. So you learn these lessons here instead of downrange when it matters. The night exercise continued, each student confronting the humbling reality that their daylight skills did not automatically transfer to darkness. Sarah moved between positions, identifying errors and teaching corrections, watching confidence grow as students mastered the new challenges. By midnight, the exercise concluded. The students were exhausted but energized, having pushed through difficult conditions and emerged more capable. As they packed equipment, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation. Multiple students discussing what they had learned, acknowledging how much they had not known, expressing appreciation for instruction that challenged their assumptions. Dalton approached as Sarah secured the last of the thermal scopes. "That was excellent teaching," he said. "You identified problems I would have missed and corrected them efficiently. These students are lucky to have you as an instructor." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "I mean it," Dalton continued. "When I first met you, I made assumptions based on limited information. I was wrong. You are one of the most technically proficient shooters I have worked with, and you're proving to be an exceptional instructor. I wanted you to know that." It was a direct acknowledgement of his initial skepticism and subsequent change of perspective. Sarah appreciated the honesty more than empty praise. Dalton had evaluated evidence, adjusted his conclusions, and stated his revised assessment clearly. It was the professional approach she respected. Week 5 brought the final examination period. Students would be tested on everything they had learned, culminating in a comprehensive field exercise that combined all skills under realistic conditions. The pressure was tangible, students reviewing notes during breaks and seeking additional clarification during evening hours. Friday morning, Colonel Briggs appeared at the range with news. Division headquarters was sending observers for the final exercise, he announced to the instructors. They want to evaluate the program's effectiveness before committing resources to expansion. The students need to perform well. "No pressure," Williams muttered after Briggs departed. "They will do fine," Sarah said. "We have prepared them thoroughly." But she understood the stakes. This course represented a significant investment in advanced training, and its future depended on demonstrated results. The students knew it too. Their usual confidence was tempered by awareness that their performance would be judged by people who could terminate the entire program. The weekend brought intensive preparation. Students practiced on the range, reviewing environmental reading techniques and refining their calculations. Sarah held extra instruction sessions, answering questions and addressing specific weaknesses she had identified in individual shooters. Sunday evening, Park approached her with concern evident on his face. "I am worried about the long-range portion," he admitted. "My win calls are better than they were, but I'm still not reading transitions as quickly as I should." "Walk me through your process," Sarah said. They spent an hour on the range, Park demonstrating his technique, while Sarah identified the subtle hesitations and uncertainties that slowed his analysis. She showed him shortcuts, pattern recognition methods that accelerated wind reading without sacrificing accuracy. By the time they finished, Park looked more confident. Monday arrived with perfect weather, which created its own challenges. Clear skies meant intense thermal activity, unstable mirage, and rapidly changing conditions throughout the day. The kind of environment that tested every skill the students had learned. The division observers arrived at 0800, 3 senior officers led by Brigadier General Morrison. They took positions in the observation tower, armed with spotting scopes and evaluation criteria. Briggs joined them, clearly nervous about the scrutiny his program was receiving. The exercise structure was demanding. Each student would engage 5 targets, ranging from 1,200 to 3,200 meters, demonstrating proficiency across all distance categories. They would work independently, making their own environmental assessments and shot calculations without instructor assistance. Williams, Dalton, and Sarah would observe and evaluate but not intervene unless safety issues arose. The students were on their own. Rodriguez went first, engaging his targets with the methodical precision he had developed over 5 weeks. His first 3 shots were solid hits. His fourth, at 2,400 meters, missed by 18 inches due to a wind shift he detected too late. His fifth, at 2,800 meters, struck within 12 inches of center. A strong performance overall. The morning progressed with similar results. Most students performed well, demonstrating genuine mastery of the advanced techniques they had learned. A few struggled with the longest distances, revealing gaps that 5 weeks had not quite filled. But the overall standard was high, validating the training program's effectiveness. Then Jennings stepped up for his string. He had been one of the most improved students, transforming from vocal skeptic to dedicated learner. Sarah watched him prepare, noting his careful environmental analysis and confident shot execution. His first 4 targets were clean hits, including an impressive shot at 2,600 meters under challenging mirage conditions. His final target was set at 3,200 meters, the maximum distance for the exercise. It was a brutal shot, requiring perfect technique and favorable conditions. Most students who attempted it had missed, their calculations overwhelmed by the complexity of variables at extreme range. Jennings spent 10 minutes analyzing conditions. Sarah could see him working through the process she had taught, checking multiple indicators and building a comprehensive environmental picture. He made his scope adjustments and settled into position. The shot broke cleanly. Through the spotting scope, Sarah tracked the bullet's long flight across the desert morning, watching it climb and fall through multiple thermal layers and wind zones. The seconds stretched out, the entire range falling silent as everyone waited for target confirmation. The spotter called it. Miss high by 30 inches. Jennings remained in position, staring through his scope with visible frustration. It was an understandable miss, given the extreme distance and difficult conditions. But Sarah knew he had been hoping for a perfect string to demonstrate everything he had learned. In the observation tower, she could see the division officers conferring. Morrison was gesturing, apparently making a point about the difficulty of 3,200-meter shots. The body language suggested they were questioning whether the program was setting unrealistic standards. Briggs descended from the tower and approached the instructors. Morrison wants to see instructor capability at that distance, he said quietly. He thinks we are asking students to perform shots that are not reliably achievable even by experts. He wants a demonstration. Dalton glanced at Sarah and Williams. That is a challenging shot under current conditions, he said. Thermal activity is creating significant mirage distortion. Who is taking it? Williams asked. Briggs looked at Sarah. Chun, you are up. Show them what trained expertise looks like at 3,200 meters. It was the proving moment again, larger stakes this time. Not just personal reputation, but the entire program's future resting on one shot. Sarah felt the weight of multiple assessments converging, the students watching, the division officers evaluating, her co-instructors' reputations indirectly tied to her performance. She collected her rifle and ammunition, walking to the firing position with her mind already shifting into the focused state that preceded difficult shots. 3,200 meters in unstable thermal conditions. It was at the edge of what she considered reliably achievable, but she had made similar shots before. The students gathered behind the firing line, their conversations falling silent. They had watched her demonstrate capability multiple times over 5 weeks, but this was different. This was extreme distance under difficult conditions with program-level stakes attached to the outcome. Sarah settled into position and began her analysis. The thermal activity was intense, mirage boiling across the desert floor and making precise wind reading difficult. She studied the patterns carefully, looking for the stable zones within the chaos, identifying the wind transitions that would affect her bullet's flight. Through her scope, the target was barely visible, a small dark shape wavering in the heat distortion. She checked a rangefinder. 3,200 meters confirmed. She calculated trajectory, factoring in the extreme bullet drop, the multiple wind zones, the temperature gradient from surface to altitude. The math was complex, the variables numerous, the margin for error minimal. One miscalculation would result in a miss that could undermine 5 weeks of successful instruction and jeopardize the program's expansion. Behind her, she heard someone shift weight nervously. The tension on the range was palpable, everyone aware that this single shot carried disproportionate importance. In the tower, Morrison and the other observers watched through spotting scopes, ready to judge whether the program's standards were realistic or aspirational. Sarah made her final scope adjustments, the clicks counting up as she dialed in her solution. She controlled her breathing, found her natural pause, and began the trigger press. The shot broke clean, the rifle recoiling solidly against her shoulder. The bullet traced its arc across the morning desert, climbing through thermal layers and wind transitions, carrying calculations that would determine whether expertise could be reliably demonstrated or whether extreme distance shooting was fundamentally unpredictable. Morrison was bent over his spotting scope, absolutely still with concentration. Briggs stood beside him, his expression tense. The students watched in complete silence, their attention fixed on the distant target that would reveal whether their instructor could perform under maximum pressure, what she had been teaching them for 5 weeks. Morrison lifted his head from the spotting scope. His expression had changed completely, the professional skepticism replaced by something close to astonishment. He looked at Briggs, then back at the target, then at Sarah still in position behind her rifle. "Impact," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent range. "Center mass." That was a perfect shot. The students erupted. Park let out a whoop of excitement. Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. Jennings stood with his mouth slightly open, staring at the distant target where Sarah had just accomplished what he had missed by 30 inches using the same techniques she had taught him. Sarah engaged her safety and stood, her movements calm despite her heart rate still elevated from the shot. She had executed her calculations correctly, read the complex thermal conditions accurately, and delivered the bullet precisely where physics demanded it go. The result was exactly what she had intended, but the relief was real. Williams approached first, his handshake firm. "Outstanding work," he said simply. "That was world-class shooting under pressure." Dalton was grinning. 3,200 meters in this thermal mess, he said. "I would not have attempted that shot. You made it look routine." But it was the students' reactions that carried the most weight. They gathered around Sarah with genuine excitement, their questions coming rapid fire. "How did you read the wind in that mirage? What was your holdover calculation? How do you stay calm during shots like that?" Sarah answered each question, walking them through her process step by step. She explained the mirage reading technique that found stable zones within the chaos, the trajectory calculation that accounted for extreme bullet drop, the mental discipline that kept focus under pressure. The students absorbed every detail, no longer learning from an instructor, but from someone whose capability they had just witnessed at the highest level. Morrison descended from the observation tower with the other division officers. He approached Sarah directly, his demeanor completely different from the skeptical observer who had arrived that morning. "Specialist Chun," he said, "that was exceptional marksmanship. I came here questioning whether this program was teaching realistic skills. You just demonstrated that the standards are not only realistic, but achievable with proper training." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. Morrison turned to Briggs. "This program gets full approval for expansion," he said. "I want 3 more courses stood up within the next quarter, and I want Specialist Chun involved in training the additional instructor cadre. Her technical knowledge and teaching ability are exactly what we need." Briggs looked relieved and vindicated. The program he had championed was now validated at the highest level, and the instructor he had selected despite her unconventional background had just proven his judgment correct. The exercise continued through the afternoon, the remaining students completing their strings with renewed confidence. Sarah's shot had done more than demonstrate instructor capability. It had shown the students that the techniques they had learned could achieve results that seemed impossible, that expertise could overcome conditions that appeared prohibitive. By late afternoon, all evaluations were complete. The students had performed well overall, with several achieving scores that exceeded the initial program goals. The division observers departed satisfied, their reports clearly favorable. The course had succeeded beyond the measurable metrics, transforming skeptical soldiers into believers in advanced marksmanship techniques. That evening, the instructors and students gathered for an informal debrief. Williams reviewed the day's performance, highlighting strengths and identifying areas for continued improvement. Dalton discussed lessons learned and how the training would apply in operational environments. Then Sarah stood to address the class. 5 weeks ago, most of you arrived skeptical, she began. Some of you questioned why I was teaching this course. Some doubted whether the technical depth I was presenting had practical value. Those doubts were reasonable. I was asking you to trust methods you had not seen demonstrated, to learn techniques that contradicted simpler approaches you already knew. The students listened with attention, their earlier skepticism now a distant memory. But you stayed open-minded, Sarah continued. You practiced the techniques even when they felt uncomfortable. You asked questions when concepts were unclear. You pushed yourselves beyond what you thought possible. Today, you demonstrated that advanced environmental reading and precise ballistic calculation can reliably achieve hits at distances most shooters never attempt. You proved that expertise is teachable and that dedication produces results. Jennings raised his hand. Can I say something? Sarah nodded. When I got here, I thought this was going to be basic instruction with maybe a few new tricks, Jennings said. I did not expect to completely rebuild my understanding of wind reading and environmental factors. And I definitely did not expect my instructor to be making 3,200-meter shots in conditions that made my 2,600-meter attempt look easy. The other students murmured agreement. You changed how I think about shooting, Jennings continued. Not just the technical skills, but the whole approach to environmental analysis and shot preparation. I came here thinking I was already pretty good. I am leaving knowing how much more there is to learn. That is valuable. Park added his perspective. The night shooting exercise was a breakthrough for me, he said. I realized I was relying on visual cues that disappeared after sunset, and I had no backup methods. You taught me to trust instruments and verify with multiple data sources. That is going to matter in the field. Rodriguez spoke next. In combat, I made shots that worked, but I could not always explain why, he said. Now I understand the environmental factors that were helping or hurting my accuracy. That knowledge makes me more consistent and more confident in difficult conditions. The testimonials continued, each student sharing specific moments where their understanding had shifted or their capability had expanded. Sarah listened with satisfaction, recognizing that the true measure of teaching success was not her own performance, but the growth she had facilitated in others. Williams stood to conclude the session. This has been one of the most effective courses I have been part of, he said. The student performance today validated every hour of preparation and instruction. You should all be proud of what you accomplished. He looked at Sarah. And Specialist Chun, you should know that your technical expertise and teaching ability set a standard that will influence how we train precision marksmen across the division. This program succeeds because you brought knowledge that most of us did not have and shared it effectively. Dalton added his agreement. I have worked with elite shooting instructors at multiple installations, he said. Chun ranks among the best I have encountered, and her technical depth exceeds most. This course would not have achieved these results without her contribution. The compliments were professional and sincere, coming from instructors whose standards were demanding and whose praise meant something. Sarah accepted them with quiet appreciation, aware that she had proven something important not just to these specific men, but to herself. The evening concluded with students collecting their completion certificates and preparing to return to their units. They would carry the advanced techniques back to operational environments, spreading the knowledge Sarah had shared. Some would become instructors themselves, teaching others what they had learned. The impact would multiply beyond this single course. As the classroom emptied, Sarah reflected on the journey from armorer to instructor, from dismissed technician to respected expert. The path had been neither direct nor easy. It had required patience through years of being underestimated, dedication to developing skills that went unrecognized, and the willingness to prove herself repeatedly when credentials alone were insufficient. But standing in the empty classroom with 5 weeks of successful instruction behind her and expansion opportunities ahead, Sarah recognized that the struggle had produced something valuable. Not just her own advancement, but a demonstration that expertise came in unexpected forms, that capability could not be accurately judged by appearance or position, and that skill ultimately commanded respect regardless of the assumptions that preceded it. The next morning, Sarah reported to Colonel Briggs's office for her new assignment brief. The Precision Marksman program was expanding, and she would help develop curriculum for additional courses while continuing to teach advanced environmental analysis. It was the role she had been preparing for unknowingly during all those hours maintaining rifles and studying conditions that others ignored. Briggs handed her the official orders. "You have proven yourself at every level," he said. "From that first 2,800-meter shot that caught my attention to yesterday's performance that convinced division headquarters. You have earned this opportunity through consistent excellence." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "One more thing," Briggs added. "We are promoting you to sergeant, effective immediately. Your technical expertise and teaching ability warrant recognition beyond your current rank." The promotion was unexpected but logical. Sarah had been performing at a level that exceeded her pay grade for months. The acknowledgement felt like the final piece of validation, the formal recognition that her capability matched the informal respect she had earned. She left Briggs's office with new orders, new rank, and new responsibilities. The journey from dismissed armor to promoted instructor was complete, though Sarah knew it was also just beginning. There would be new students to teach, new doubters to convince, new standards to set. The work would continue, and she would meet it with the same dedication that had brought her this far. The second course began 3 weeks later with a new group of students, 18 more soldiers selected for advanced marksmanship training. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom on the first day, aware that she was beginning the cycle again with shooters who knew nothing about her except what their orders told them. This time, the dynamic was different from the start. Word had spread through the sniper community about the first course's results, about the instructor who had made a 3,200-meter shot under difficult conditions while division officers watched. Several students had heard stories from graduates of the initial class, testimonials about technical depth and teaching effectiveness that preceded Sarah's introduction. But credibility still required demonstration. Stories were just stories until proven true. The first week followed the established curriculum, Williams covering fundamentals while Dalton handled tactical applications. When Sarah took over for environmental analysis instruction, the students listened with focused attention. Some skepticism remained, the natural wariness of experienced soldiers evaluating a new instructor, but it lacked the edge of dismissal that had characterized the first course. By the second week, Sarah's teaching had established her authority. Students sought her out during breaks for clarification and additional guidance. Her explanations were clear, her demonstrations precise, her corrections helpful rather than critical. The respect built steadily through accumulated small interactions rather than one dramatic proving moment. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Torres, the spotter who had made side bets against Sarah during that first range day months ago, appeared at the classroom door. He waited until the session ended, then approached with something that looked like humility. "Sergeant Shun," he said, using her new rank. "Can I speak with you briefly?" "Of course," Sarah replied. Torres glanced around to ensure they had relative privacy. "I wanted to apologize," he said directly. "When we first met, I made assumptions about your capability based on limited information. I was wrong, and I was disrespectful. Your shooting and teaching are exceptional. I should have recognized your expertise sooner." The apology was specific and sincere, the kind that required genuine reflection to produce. Sarah appreciated the directness. "I understand," she said. "Initial skepticism is natural. You adjusted your assessment based on evidence. That is what matters. Dalton told me about the course results and your 3,200-meter demonstration," Torres continued. "I have been shooting for 15 years, and I could not reliably make that shot under those conditions. What you accomplished was remarkable. It was proper technique and favorable timing, Sarah replied, deflecting the praise with characteristic modesty. It was expertise, Torres corrected, and I wanted you to know that I recognize that now. I also wanted to ask if you would be willing to review my wind reading methods. I think I'm missing subtleties that you see clearly. They spent an hour on the range, Torres demonstrating his techniques, while Sarah identified the gaps in his environmental analysis. She showed him the indicators he was overlooking, the transition zones he was missing, the atmospheric details that affected his calculations. Torres absorbed the instruction with focused attention, asking intelligent questions and taking detailed notes. "This is incredibly helpful," he said as they concluded. "You're teaching me things I should have learned years ago." "You're learning them now," Sarah replied. "That is what matters." After Torres departed, Sarah reflected on the interaction. The man who had made dismissive comments and side bets was now seeking her instruction and acknowledging her expertise. It was a complete reversal, evidence that capability eventually commanded respect regardless of initial assumptions. The second course continued with steady progress. Students performed well during range exercises, applying the environmental reading techniques with increasing confidence. The night shooting exercise challenged them, as it had the first class, but they adapted quickly and demonstrated genuine mastery by the session's end. Week 5 brought the final examination with a new group of division observers. This time, Sarah's performance was anticipated rather than questioned. The observers knew her reputation, expected excellence, and watched the students with interest rather than focusing on instructor capability. The students performed exceptionally. Multiple shooters achieved hits beyond 2,500 meters under variable conditions. Several demonstrated wind reading skills that exceeded standard qualification requirements. The program's effectiveness was undeniable, validated by consistent results across 2 separate courses. During the final debrief, one student named Walsh spoke up with a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Sergeant Chun," he said, "how did you develop this level of expertise? What was your path to becoming this skilled?" Sarah considered the question carefully. It had not been a straightforward path, and the honest answer was more complex than inspirational. "I spent years being underestimated," she began. "I was assigned to support roles based on assumptions about my capability rather than actual performance. I could have become resentful or given up. Instead, I decided to learn everything possible about the weapons themselves and the environmental factors that affected their performance." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "I studied during off hours, practiced techniques that no one was teaching, observed patterns that others ignored. I developed expertise quietly, without recognition, because the work itself was interesting and valuable. When opportunities finally came to demonstrate what I had learned, I was ready because I had been preparing for years without knowing when or if the chance would arrive." Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "So the key was persistent effort, even without immediate validation?" "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Most people stop developing skills when external validation disappears. I kept learning because the subject matter fascinated me, not because anyone was acknowledging my progress. That sustained effort eventually produced expertise that could not be dismissed." Other students shared their perspectives on the course, expressing appreciation for instruction that challenged their assumptions and expanded their capabilities. The testimonials were similar to the first course, evidence that effective teaching produced consistent results regardless of student composition. Williams concluded the session with remarks about the program's future. "We are expanding to 6 courses per year," he announced. "The demand for advanced marksmanship training exceeds our current capacity. Sergeant Chun will be developing curriculum for additional modules on extreme distance, shooting, and complex environmental conditions." It was recognition of Sarah's unique contribution, the technical knowledge that distinguished this program from standard sniper training. She had transformed from armorer to instructor to curriculum developer, each role building on the previous one. After the students departed, Dalton approached with news. "I am putting you in for an Army Commendation Medal," he said, for exceptional technical expertise and teaching excellence that significantly enhanced division marksmanship capability. The paperwork is already moving through channels. That is not necessary, Sarah protested. It absolutely is necessary, Dalton replied firmly. Your contribution deserves formal recognition. You have changed how we train precision marksmen across this entire division. That level of impact warrants acknowledgement beyond just promotion. Williams agreed. You have set a standard that other programs are now trying to match, he said. Your technical depth and teaching ability created something genuinely innovative. Recognition is appropriate. Sarah accepted their insistence with quiet gratitude. The medal meant less than the respect of her peers and the success of her students, but it represented official validation of work that had gone unrecognized for too long. That evening, Sarah walked across the range where everything had begun. The equipment shed where she had spent 18 months maintaining rifles stood quiet in the fading light. The firing line where she had made that first impossible shot stretched empty across the desert. The observation tower where skeptical officers had become believers stood silhouetted against the sunset. Each location marked a point in the journey from dismissed technician to respected expert. The path had been neither direct nor easy, but had produced something valuable. Not just personal advancement, but a demonstration that expertise came in unexpected forms, and that capability ultimately commanded respect regardless of the assumptions that preceded it. Sarah had proven herself at every level through consistent performance under scrutiny. She had taught students who arrived skeptical and departed convinced. She had changed minds not through argument, but through demonstrated excellence that could not be dismissed or explained away. The range would continue training shooters, the program would expand to new courses, and students would learn techniques that Sarah had developed through years of quiet dedication. The impact would multiply beyond her direct teaching, spreading through the soldiers she trained who would become instructors themselves. Standing on the empty range in the evening quiet, Sarah felt the satisfaction of work well done and challenges successfully met. The journey from armorer to sergeant instructor was complete, though new challenges awaited. There would be more students to teach, more curriculum to develop, more standards to set. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to appreciate how far she had come and what she had accomplished. From that first day, when Torres made side bets and Dalton smiled dismissively, to this evening, when her expertise was sought after and her teaching was expanding across the division. The transformation was complete, not just in others' perception, but in her own understanding of her capability and worth. She had always known she was skilled, but now that knowledge was validated by evidence that others could not deny. Sarah walked off the range toward her quarters, leaving the familiar ground where she had proven herself repeatedly. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and new challenges, but tonight she carried the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every bit of respect she had received. 6 months after that first impossible shot, Sarah stood in front of a room full of instructor candidates. These were the men and women selected to teach the expanding precision marksman program at installations across 3 divisions. They represented the best shooters from their respective units, all experienced, all accomplished, all gathered to learn the curriculum Sarah had developed. The composition of the room reflected progress. 4 of the 18 candidates were women, their presence unremarkable in a way that would have been impossible just months earlier. They sat among their male counterparts without segregation or special consideration, evaluated by the same standards and expected to meet the same requirements. Sarah began her presentation on advanced environmental analysis, the technical foundation that distinguished this program from traditional marksmanship training. The candidates listened with focused attention, taking notes and asking sophisticated questions that demonstrated genuine engagement with complex material. During the afternoon break, one of the female candidates approached. Lieutenant Morrison, according to her name tape, though Sarah recognized her as the daughter of the brigadier general who had observed that crucial 3,200-meter shot. "My father told me about your demonstration," Morrison said. He said it was the most technically sophisticated shooting he had witnessed in 30 years. That endorsement is why I requested assignment to this instructor course. I hope the training meets your expectations, Sarah replied. It already exceeds them, Morrison said. The technical depth is remarkable. Most marksmanship instruction focuses on fundamentals and repetition. You are teaching us to read environments like meteorologists and calculate trajectories like physicists. That is a completely different level of expertise. The conversation continued as other candidates joined, their questions ranging from specific technique clarifications to broader discussions about teaching methodology. Sarah answered each inquiry with the same precision she brought to shooting, her explanations clear and her examples practical. The instructor course ran for 4 intensive weeks. Sarah taught alongside Williams and Dalton, the three of them now functioning as a seamlessly coordinated team. The mutual respect was evident in how they deferred to each other's expertise, built on each other's points, and presented a unified approach to advanced marksmanship training. By week 3, the candidates were teaching practice sessions to each other, demonstrating the techniques they would soon bring to their own students. Sarah evaluated their instruction with the same standards that had been applied to her, correcting errors and refining approaches until each candidate could effectively teach the complex material. Lieutenant Morrison proved particularly adept at environmental analysis, her technical background translating well into meteorological concepts and atmospheric calculations. During her final teaching demonstration, she explained wind transition zones with clarity that impressed even Sarah. "Excellent work," Sarah said after the session concluded. "Your students will benefit from that level of detailed explanation." "I learned from the best," Morrison replied. "Your curriculum gave me the framework. I just adapted it to my teaching style." The final week brought Colonel Briggs and Brigadier General Morrison to observe the instructor candidates' final evaluations. Each candidate would demonstrate their shooting capability at extended range, then teach a brief session on a randomly selected topic. The dual evaluation assessed both technical skill and instructional ability. The candidates performed well across both components. Their shooting demonstrated consistent mastery of advanced techniques, and their teaching showed genuine understanding of how to convey complex concepts to students with varying backgrounds. The program was successfully replicating itself, creating instructors who could spread the knowledge Sarah had developed. During the closing ceremony, General Morrison addressed the graduating instructors. "This program represents a significant advancement in how we train precision marksmen," he said. "The technical rigor and teaching methodology developed here are being adopted across multiple commands. You are leaving here with the capability to transform marksmanship training at your installations." He looked directly at Sarah. "Sergeant Chun deserves special recognition," he continued. "Her expertise created this curriculum. Her teaching established the instructional standards, and her performance demonstrated that excellence in this field is achievable through proper training and dedication. The Army is fortunate to have her leading this effort." The assembled instructors and observers applauded. Sarah accepted the recognition with the same quiet professionalism that characterized everything she did, aware that the accomplishment belonged to many people but grateful for the acknowledgement. After the ceremony, several moments stood out. Dalton shaking her hand and saying he had learned as much from working with her as she might have learned from him. Williams presenting her with a custom rifle scope engraved with the course emblem and her name. Lieutenant Morrison thanking her for demonstrating that technical expertise could come from anyone willing to develop it. But the moment that resonated most deeply came from an unexpected source. Specialist Hayes, the young armorer who had replaced Sarah in the equipment shed, appeared with a question about rifle maintenance. They spent 20 minutes discussing barrel break-in procedures and accuracy optimization techniques, technical details that most people found tedious but that both of them found fascinating. "You still love the technical work?" Hayes observed, "even with all the teaching responsibilities." "I do," Sarah confirmed. "Understanding how weapons function at a fundamental level informs everything else. The teaching is rewarding, but but the technical foundation never stops being interesting. That is why you were so effective, Hayes said. You did not abandon the technical expertise when opportunities for advancement appeared. You integrated it into everything else you do. That is real mastery. The observation was perceptive. Sarah had never stopped being the person who cared about rifle specifications and environmental details. She had simply found roles that valued that knowledge rather than dismissing it as mere technical competence separate from real capability. That evening, Sarah updated her curriculum materials for the next course cycle. The program was expanding faster than anticipated, with requests coming from installations that wanted to implement the same training standards. Each new course required preparation. Each new set of instructors needed qualification. Each expansion demanded attention to ensure quality remained consistent. It was demanding work, but Sarah approached it with the same dedication she had brought to maintaining rifles in the equipment shed. The scale had changed, the visibility had increased, but the fundamental approach remained constant. Do the work excellently, develop expertise continuously, and let performance speak for itself. A knock interrupted her preparation. Collins, one of her students from the first course, stood in the doorway. He had returned to his unit after graduation, but was visiting the base for additional training. "Sergeant Shun," he said, "I wanted to update you on how the techniques are working in operational application. My unit deployed last month, and I have been using the environmental reading methods you taught. They work exactly as you said they would. I made a shot at 2,100 meters under difficult conditions that I could not have made before your course." "That is excellent to hear," Sarah replied. "You obviously internalized the material and applied it effectively." "More than that," Collins continued, "I have been teaching other members of my platoon the basics of what I learned. They're skeptical at first, just like I was, but when they see the results, they become believers. Your influence is spreading beyond the people you directly trained." It was the impact Sarah had hoped for, knowledge multiplying through students who became teachers themselves. The techniques she had developed through years of quiet study were now being applied in operational environments, improving capability and potentially saving lives. "Have you ever been underestimated in your own career?" Sarah asked, shifting the conversation. "Have you faced doubts about your capability based on assumptions rather than performance?" Collins smiled slightly. "I am 23 and I look younger. Officers sometimes treat me like I'm still in basic training until I demonstrate otherwise. So yes, I understand something about being underestimated." "How do you handle it?" "The same way you showed us," Collins replied. "Consistent, excellent performance that cannot be dismissed. Eventually, capability commands respect. The key is not letting the initial skepticism stop you from developing expertise." It was the lesson Sarah had learned through years of experience, now being articulated by a student she had taught for 6 weeks. The knowledge was spreading, the approach was replicating, and the impact was growing beyond what she had originally imagined. After Collins departed, Sarah finished her curriculum updates and secured her materials. The office was quiet, the base settling into evening routine. Through the window, she could see the distant firing line where everything had begun with one impossible shot that changed trajectories and opened doors. The journey from dismissed armorer to recognized expert had required patience, dedication, and the willingness to prove herself repeatedly when credentials alone were insufficient. It had required years of developing expertise without recognition, maintaining skill when advancement seemed impossible, and seizing opportunities when they finally appeared. But standing in her office with expanding programs around her and students applying her techniques in operational environments, Sarah recognized that the struggle had produced something valuable. Not just personal success, but a demonstration that expertise could not be reliably predicted by appearance or position. That capability developed through dedication eventually commanded respect, and that one person's example could change assumptions that limited others. The Precision Marksman program would continue growing, new instructors would spread the techniques, and students would learn that technical depth and consistent performance mattered more than preconceptions. Sarah would continue teaching, developing curriculum, and demonstrating that excellence was achievable through proper training and unwavering dedication. The range outside her window sat empty in the fading light, waiting for tomorrow's students who would arrive with their own doubts and assumptions. Sarah would meet them with the same patient expertise she brought to every challenge, teaching techniques that worked and demanding standards that produced results. Some would arrive skeptical. All would leave convinced. That was the power of demonstrated excellence and consistent performance. That was the lesson Sarah had learned and would continue teaching for as long as students needed to hear it. Capability commands respect. Expertise earns recognition. Performance speaks louder than assumption. These truths had guided Sarah's journey from armorer to sergeant instructor, and they would continue guiding her path forward into whatever challenges awaited.